Hello and welcome to a very special How I Paint Things. Now what I've got whizzing around in front of me today is one of the Stahltruppen for the German side in Konflikt 47, which is coming out very soon now from Warlord Games. Now these fellas, I wasn't sure what to think of them at first, if I'm perfectly honest. Seeing the grey sort of urban camo pattern stuff that they were doing for them on the store page, I don't know, they didn't stand out to me immediately as awesome. But having had a play around here, I'm coming around on them. I do quite like how this fella's turned out. So we're basically adapting an ambush pattern for a tank onto an armored, a walking tank. Pretty easy to do. Looks quite cool, I think. As always, the paints for this will be listed in the description below, so let's get started. So once you've got your fella assembled, it's time to go ahead and prime him. Now here I've used skeleton bone from the army painter, but in truth, if I had it with me, I would have used desert yellow instead. Desert yellow is a little darker, a little bit more intense in color, but skeleton bone is going to work just fine for what we've got planned over the top. Now to begin with, we're going to start by laying down the majority color of his armor. And for this, I'm going to use Camo Sand from the army painter. Now, individuals are available from them now, which is awesome, but this one comes from the German paint set, so it's a pretty handy one to have. It is a little bit lighter by comparison than desert sand would be, or desert yellow rather. As you'll see, it will cover fairly well over our skeleton bone. All the same, once this first coat is dry, I'm going to come back and give it a second over the top just to make sure that everything's nice and solid. And don't worry at all about hitting pretty much everything. We're just going to cover all of the gear, first of all, with this armor color. Now that is a really nice color. I just really like that camo sand. I do think it's quite nice. And what I'm going to move on to now is heavy metal. Now this one's from the Blanche range, but you could also use gunmetal here or something if you fancied. It'd just be a little bit lighter than this. I want quite a pronounced difference in color. Now, the order in which we're going to do things on some miniatures is ordinarily quite clear cut. But on this fella, I think what's going to happen is we're going to end up going back and forth between a couple of areas, both to tidy up and to apply our camo scheme a little bit later. But for now, let's concentrate on the bits that we want to be metallic. So little support struts like this, for example, the chain segment holding his armor on at his back. I would recommend, it's a good idea to check out the product page for these guys because seeing them from behind is actually super useful. Now moving on, what I have here is strap gray, and I'm going to use this for a couple of things. First of all, it's my go-to for German helmets. It's nice and dark, sort of off black, perfect. I'm going to come back and finish that in a second, but I'm also going to use it for the sort of the undersuit sections. Because I was looking at this guy and I thought about doing them in Feldgrau. But the proportions on them they're off for that, I would suggest. These are definitely more undersuit, mechanical ribbing and stuff like that. So I'm going to use this gray instead. Now some of my lines aren't quite perfect there, but that's all right. A little bit of detail on the arms in particular is just a wee bit soft, so knowing exactly where the edge of a sleeve or the armor plate itself is a bit of a tricky one. But the end result, that'll work fine. What I'm going to do now is grab here some oak brown, and I'm going to treat this as leather. Now, the straps on these, on the product page, they're demonstrated as being actually the same color as the armor, but I want them to look like they are strapped on. Now, because these figures are so layered, I want to have a think about how I'm going to approach the actual camo painting. Because if I flip them around, this is a really good example. You have the exterior plates, the outermost facing plates of the armor, and then underneath you've got more layered, segmented bits. Now, part of me reckons, if you want to take the approach that these would be painted in the field like tanks were, in some instances, you could just splurge camo over the top of them and it would be fine. It will look okay. I kind of want to go the route that these plates because the Stahltruppen are taken so seriously, they're a propaganda, shock and awe sort of troop, I'm going to go ahead and try and make it look like the plates themselves, the outermost ones, are painted at a factory, and for a bit of visual contrast, keep the plates beneath without any camo, just that yellow color. This might not look as good as I think it does in my head, but we'll find out together. So to get started here, what I'm going to use is Camo Brown. Now, this is a warm, almost reddish sort of brown. This one's from the German paint set as well. Just adding a little bit of water there. And now what we're going to do, let's start trying to paint on slightly organic, wobbly shapes. Since I want to do these as the ambush pattern, it's going to be fairly wavy, blobby shapes for the most part. So I want to try and cover about a third of the panels with this. And wherever possible, keep your brush moving in just a single fluid motion as much as you can, because you'll get a much smoother, more natural edge than coming back and keep adding lines. And then you can very easily fill in the blot itself. And that's actually worked quite well. I might have applied a little bit much. I don't know. We'll see how it works once I've got the rest of the green on. Now here I'm actually going to turn to Woodland Camo, because the camo green that you get in the German set, it is aimed more at cloth. So things like the Zeltbahn or oak leaf camo, that's where that's going to come in handy. But for your vehicles or powered armor, as the case may be, Woodland Camo is going to be a little more accurate. So trying to follow the same general principle, but this time with green. Little organic shapes. You want to leave a bit of the yellow still there. Now you're going to want your greens to overlap your brown and beige a little bit. What we'll turn to now is a wee bit of Barren Dune in a dry brush. And you don't want to go very hard with this, concentrating mostly along the edges. This is one where it's going to look a little bit chalky when it first goes on, but once we have, once we've washed it, this is going to come together quite well. So concentrating mostly along the edges of the yellow stuff, but don't worry if you do get a little on the other colors too, because it will actually look quite natural. Now we're cooking. What I'm going to use is a little bit of pure red to dot in the lenses. So in his eyes here, for example. Oh gosh, that's going to end up everywhere. But don't worry too much, because I can touch this up with a little bit of the base colors in a second. And then to finish off the base coats, I have some desert yellow, and I'm going to paint in the Panzerfaust. This is actually a really interesting point of comparison between the desert yellow and that camo sand. Now once that's dried and you've done any bits of tidy up that you want to, it's time to go ahead and shade him. Now what I've mixed up for the wash here is 2 parts of strong tone with just 1 part of Speedpaint Medium, so 2-to-1, which is a little bit thicker than I normally would. Reason being, I do still want the wash to flow very easily, but I want it to be a little darker than I would normally let my strong tone be. I want gritty, sinister, spooky boy here. As much as possible though, while applying it, keep your brush moving in the same direction. It'll help avoid pooling if you do that. And I'm going to douse the entire miniature in my strong tone mix. So this is not too terribly complicated. Let's pop it on and we'll let it dry for about half an hour. See what we get once that has dried. And then you should end up with something that looks like this. Loads of shading, plenty of depth. We haven't had to fight anything for that. And I'm quite happy with how that's turned out. Now, folks will quite regularly mention my shade dries shiny, a wash dries shiny. It doesn't matter. We're going to varnish this. So, if this is a little bit shiny now, it's not a problem. Varnishing your miniatures is about more than just offering protection. It's going to change up the surface on this fella quite a bit, and then it won't be shiny. Simple. At this point, there's not really a huge amount left to do. Because we have already done that dry brush, we've got some texture and a little bit of highlighting on our armor panels. But we do want to finish off that ambush style camo. So we're going to go back to our camo sand, and then with just a little on the end of a brush, little dots. There we go. You want to keep them roughly the same distance apart from one another, if you can. Don't worry too much if it's not perfect. And try and space them out relatively randomly, but again, we are just kind of approximating the look here. So over the green and the brown goes our camo sand. Now I may actually have added a few too many spots. We'll see what it looks like once we're finished. With your woodland camo, you then add the little green dots to the beige parts. Now then, to get a little bit of chipping around the edges of some of those armor plates, what I've got is a bit of packing foam that I've stuffed really, really tightly into one of the old caps from a brush that I've lost somewhere. What I've done then is dip that in a little bit of oak brown, and what we'll do is just tap along the edge of the side of what I've got here. First of all, so you leave behind little random blips, and we're going to do that on some of the armor. This works best if you concentrate towards edges, places that are naturally going to pick up a bit of denting, like they've seen some action. Particularly, good idea to do it around the boots. That might be a little bit much. Now, with that done, what I'm going to do is to take them outside and hit them with a matte varnish spray. You can also brush this on, works perfectly well, but the rattle can's nice and quick. I'm doing this now because what it's going to do is give us a surface texture that'll actually work for our final step. And there we go. What a difference a varnish makes, right? So don't worry if your washes are drying shiny. It's not going to matter. What I have got as a final step is a pencil. This is a 2B. And what I'm going to do is use the edge of it along some of the bits where I've done that chipping. So just a little bit of this rubbing along the edge. And what you'll get is a slightly silvery edge, which catches the light just the right way. And yeah, makes it look a little bit more scuffed. Now, the more of this you apply, the more recent the damage is going to look. So try and be sparing with it at first. Now, this will also work quite well along the edge of the helmet. But yeah, just a few little scuffs of this, as and where you'll want, and then we'll call them done. I'll go ahead, pop the recipe for the base in the description, and let's get a look at what it looks like when he's all finished.
And so there at last, our Stahltruppen is complete, and I have to admit I'm quite happy with that result. There are a couple of things I would probably do differently, particularly in hindsight. I think the dots on the pattern here, next time I would do fewer and slightly larger. Taking a pattern which works perfectly well on a large vehicle and just scaling it straight down, I don't think, maybe it's a little bit busy at this scale, but that's something to have a play around with. I'm not unhappy with the result, I just think it could be a little bit better. So thanks again goes to Warlord Games for letting me have a couple of these guys. Honestly, I turned out to like them more than I thought I would. I gotta admit, I prefer the Fireflies. I think they're a little bit more Rift tech, high tech, space age almost looking stuff, versus the slightly more diesel punk, chunky looking armored guys on the German side, but they're pretty cool, so I do like them. And yeah, not doing the boots in black, like the whole lower leg in black, I get where they were going for as a design thing, but maybe it looks a little bit cut off at the knee. I like this. Again, thanks as well goes to Exit 23 Games for the light and sound equipment, and as always, my wonderful patrons who are keeping me ticking in paints and glue, which includes my most gorgeous producers who are showing up on screen now. Thank you very much for your support, folks. Now, any questions or anything, feel free to drop them in the old comment box below. My Blue Sky and Instagram are both linked there too. So, thank you very much for your time, one and all, and you all enjoy the rest of your day.